welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz, and today is True Crime Tuesday. This past Thursday was Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Boy, do I have a feast of a case for you today. Did anybody ask for demons and cannibalism? No? Well, that's what I have on the plate today, so pull up a chair and let's dig in. But before we get into today's story, let's pause for a quick promotion. And today we're highlighting snow. Snow is what I credit for getting my smile nice and white and giving me the confidence to smile as wide as I want whenever I want. All these holiday parties are coming up, so make sure you're confident flashing a big old grin at the person you've had your eye on with snow. And it's seriously not too late, because I saw results with my initial treatment within days, and in about a week my teeth were almost this bright. And they weren't like horrible before, but they were pretty yellow. And seriously, no excuses, because you can try snow for 25% off today when you click the link right in the description here. Get your smile ready for the holidays today, and let's get back to today's story. So I know I literally just said we were going to start filling in all the missing states that we haven't visited yet, but apparently I've still got a hint of the wanderlust, because today we are going to Egypt. We're going to start in Egypt in 1968, to be specific, when Omaima would be born. Now, Egypt was going through a lot of changes during the 70s as we were over here, but things were a bit different over there. Anwar Sadat would come into power, and with him would come many positive and negative changes. The economy would start to pick up, and while some freedoms would increase, Islamic extremism is said to as well. So there was an interesting combination of more women's rights. Women were working more, leaving bad situations more. But at the same time, there were other groups of people who were really holding on to these opposing mindsets. And in the midst of this, we had Omaima, who was born in southern Egypt, one of 16 children. It's said that her father was both physically and sexually abusive to at least her and her mother. Needless to say, on top of this, when she was only 7, her father would force her to undergo a female circumcision, which, if you don't and you can't figure out how, that's probably for the better. And feel free to Google it if you want, but fair warning, this is more of the less you know type thing. But it is a practice that is sometimes carried out in African and Muslim countries to basically disfigure a woman so that she can't experience sexual pleasure. And it's used in religious practices, but my understanding of the procedure is that it's done basically to keep a woman from enjoying sex so that she's less likely to cheat on her husband. And correct me if I'm wrong with that. There's no medical reason to do this to a person, and if anything, it creates medical problems. And it's also extremely painful and makes sex painful for the woman after she has endured it. So this happened to Omaima at the age of 7. And then her mother would end up deciding that she had had enough, both physically and emotionally. She was sick of abuse and sick of seeing her kids being abused, so she divorced her husband and moved the family to Cairo. Specifically Cairo Necropolis, or the City of the Dead. And the city was made within a cemetery, with the houses kind of mixed in with the graves. So they would live there until she grew up, and as she did, she would become more and more beautiful. And when she was about to turn 18, she would end up attracting an American oil worker named Roger Stainbrook. Omaima's mother pressured her to marry him after she discovered that the two had become intimate. She felt like this was basically Omaima's ticket to a better life, and she also kind of felt that no upstanding Muslim man would want her after she was ruined. But Omaima would do just that. She married Roger and went off to the US, specifically Texas, and things didn't end up lasting. They would end up getting divorced shortly after moving to Texas together. So Omaima was basically all on her own in Texas with limited English skills. She would pick up some different odd jobs from modeling to nannying, but found that she could support herself with her looks by kind of having men support her as well. And she would eventually settle down in Orange County, California, where she would get into a little bit of trouble. For one, and I don't know what exactly the thin line here is, but she engaged in almost hooker-like behavior with the men in bars using the names Ishta and Nadia. I guess kind of soliciting them, but not specifically for money was what she would do. Apparently she did kind of go for the older guys who had a bit more of the money. And in 1989, it was a big year for her because she would get her license, which is great, but then she would occur about 12 traffic violations, including car theft, and she would get arrested for robbing a pharmacy. And then she almost bit the breast off of an associate at a department store who had confronted her about possibly shoplifting. This would get her put away for a couple of months. Then in October of 1991, she was sitting in a bar named Madeline's when a man wearing a big old red cowboy hat and red cowboy boots walked in, and Omaima could think two things: Texas and money. Everyone but Omaima seemed to know Bill Nelson as well. He was a computer programmer who owned a cattle ranch, and she would sit there and kind of observe him for a little bit before deciding that he seemed like the real deal, and she introduced herself. And a few days later, they were driving to Arizona to meet his family. Then, a few days after that, they would stop in Phoenix and get married with a justice of the peace who was able to perform an Egyptian ceremony for them. So, like 2 weeks after she met him, they would be married. Girl. Let's go over some of the quick facts of this union here. So Bill is 56 and Omaima is 23. She's literally half his age. Bill already has 5 kids, some of whom are younger than his wife, and he has 17 grandchildren. So, I mean, you never know, but people were kind of whispering gold digger, and the receipts were kind of adding up. So another thing about Bill was that he also had served some time behind bars recently as well. 4 years to be exact, for smuggling weed as a pilot. I mean, nothing extremely serious, but some good time away, and he was just recently paroled. So Omaima was truly a breath of fresh air, or something like that. And our story moves very quickly, so she wouldn't get to spend too much time with Bill's children, but one notable incident did occur when they would all go horseback riding together, and Omaima got thrown right off the horse, and instead of being a diva about it, she took a shot of vodka and hopped right back on, which at the time was a little impressive and kind of dispelled the whole gold digging diva look that she was kind of trying to get away from. But like I said, the story moves fast, and in October they get married, like right after meeting. So the first holiday as husband and wife that they would spend together would be Thanksgiving. Bill tried to get his daughter Martha to come spend the holiday with himself and Omaima, but Martha really just was not feeling it, and she told her dad to have a good Thanksgiving and maybe she would join him another year. Unfortunately, another year would never come, because on December 1st, a red Corvette would pull up to a residence in Anaheim, and Omaima would appear at Richard Gray's door. She would tell him that her husband had assaulted her and that she had killed him in self-defense, showing him cuts all over her body as well and marks on her wrists. He would tell her to leave and he would call the police. And then the next day, Jose Escobar would be at home and he would see a bright red Corvette pull up to his apartment. He didn't know anyone with a bright red Corvette, so he didn't answer the door. And whoever it was left. But then they came back a few hours later and started banging on his door. So he opened it, and standing there is Omaima. He dated Omaima about a year before, but things hadn't worked out. She would tell him the same story that she told Richard Gary the day before, and tell him that if he helped her move the body with his truck, she had $75,000 in cash and 2 motorcycles that belonged to Bill that he could have. And then she opened up this bag that she had with her, and he could not believe his eyes, because inside of the bag were some of Bill's intestines, lungs, and apparently his dentures. And he would agree to help her and tell her that he would go get his truck and she could wait for him in the Corvette. And shortly after that, the police would pull up and ask her what was going on. At first, she would answer their questions and tell them that Bill was out on business, until they saw that bag with the body parts in it. And then she would tell them that they belonged to a man that Bill had killed. And she was going to try and dispose of them because she was afraid of Bill. At this point, they had more than enough to search Bill's house, and what they find, guys, viewer discretion is advised. So in the bedroom was a bad scene. It was completely demolished. The bed was just soaked in blood, and it was clear that this was where Bill had died. Now, according to Omaima, she had agreed to let Bill tie her up in bed, and he started to get rough with her, but she was able to wriggle one of her arms free and grab the lamp on the stand and just smash him in the head with it. And there is evidence that this is not what happened, but this is the initial story that they had to go on. Bill clearly died in the bed. They would also find the table lamp that she talked about and an iron with traces of blood and hair on them. Then they would make their way to the bathroom, and they would find Bill's torso hanging in the shower like you would see something hanging in a butcher shop. He was skinned and he was carved, and his head and his limbs had been removed. He had also been castrated. So they would go on and go into the kitchen, and in the kitchen they would find a whole scene. There would be pots and pans still on the stove, and things were all over the place, and they would open the lid of one of the pots, and it appeared to be a stew, but there were human hands in the stew. And in the trash they would find some human meat. They'd later find out was from a hip area, and it was mixed in with cranberry sauce. And finally, in the freezer, they would find Bill's head, and it had been deep fried. They would find other parts of Bill in suitcases and cardboard boxes, but when they were done with their search, they would discover that they had about 80 to 100 pounds of Bill that were unaccounted for. Bill's neighbors would report that they had heard a garbage disposal being used at the house basically non-stop for almost 2 days around Thanksgiving weekend. So this would account for most of the missing parts of Bill. Most of them anyways. So obviously Omaima was brought in for questioning and admitted freely that she had in fact killed Bill. What is it about that movie? But anyways, she would tell them that Bill had been sexually abusive throughout the course of their relationship. From the moment that they had said, "I do," it was like a switch had flipped. And you do hear that happens sometimes, and this happened so fast. One time on their road trip, she adopted a baby kitten, and while they were driving, they got into a fight, and he just grabbed it and threw it out the window. She would go on to tell the officers that Bill's abuse would kind of cause her to snap, and she would just go into a trance for about 12 hours, after which she would kind of come to, and Bill would be dead, and Bill would be cut up, and Bill would be cooked as well. So she wouldn't remember how she killed him exactly, but what she would say was that something inside of her told her to do it, like demons. I can't escape demons lately, but okay, demons told her to kill him. Here's a friendly piece of advice. If you think demons are telling you to do something, you're probably going to want to do the opposite thing. I mean, wouldn't that make more sense? Especially if that thing is murder. But okay, the demons told Omaima to kill Bill, and she did. While she was awaiting her trial, she would get into a bit more detail with the psychiatrist who was evaluating her. And she would say that she had these visions. And in these visions, these two blood-soaked women would come towards her, and they wouldn't stop repeating, "He must die." She would say that these women were ancient Egyptian spirits or entities. These entities would let her know that unless she dismembered and carved Bill up the way that she did, that he would be able to come and find her in the afterlife. Which, I mean, if I thought someone that I had just killed, by mistake or not, was going to find me in the afterlife, I guess I would probably be hacking them up to prevent that as well, but girl. So before the trial would take place, this case was obviously all over the news. Silence of the Lambs had just came out as well, so that definitely made it a bit more popular, and with that, another testimony would come forward. Robert Hansen had dated Omaima for some time before she had met Bill. And according to him, he was in it for the sex and she was in it for his money. And she lived with him briefly and told him she wanted more money. And one such time when she was telling him she wanted more of his money, he would be like, "So what are you gonna do for me to get it?" And she said that she would tie him up. He was feeling a little kinky, so he agreed, and once she tied him up, she pulled, it's not funny, but she pulled out a gun and demanded more money from him. And he was able to break free, grab the gun, and told her to get out of his house. He never told anyone, which is really sad, until after the news about Bill Nelson broke, and the prosecution decided to charge her for this as well. So she was charged with murder, and on December 2nd of 1992, a year to the day after she showed up on Jose's door looking for that accomplice, her trial would begin. And doctors would conclude that Omaima's injuries were not consistent with being tied up and sexually assaulted as she had claimed. They were more likely sustained from aggressively carving up Bill's body. Bill, however, did have bruises on his ankles and wrists that were consistent with being tied up. So did she tie him up and then kill him? His official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Now combined with Robert Hansen's story about being tied up and extorted, a different picture was kind of beginning to emerge. And after spending 4 years in federal prison, Bill may not have had quite as much money as he let on, and Omaima had married him. Which, fun fact, he was already married and not quite divorced, so it's just a whole nother mess. She wasn't actually married to him, but she thought that she was. Did she tie him up and demand something and then lose it on him? Did he start to break free and then she whacked him in the head to subdue him, but maybe a little bit too hard, and then maybe she plunged scissors into his neck? We'll never know for sure, but what we do know is that Bill was probably the one who was tied up, and he was the one who was bludgeoned, murdered, and then carved to pieces. She would claim that she boiled his hands to remove fingerprints. She would also admit to eating Bill as well, but only to the psychiatrist who was evaluating her. She would claim to have cooked his ribs in barbecue sauce before eating them. She would say that nothing was sweeter. Apparently, she put on a red dress and red stilettos to cut him up, cook him, and eat him, his favorite color. On the stand, she would apologize and say that she didn't actually eat him. She only killed him because she was in a fight for her life, and she was not a monster. This part is a little upsetting. They were actually allowed to show naked pictures of her in the court as evidence. Apparently, her husband Bill was the photographer, and her body didn't have any signs of abuse, as she had been claiming. So yeah, that was admitted and shown in court as evidence that her story was false, which it sounds like it was, but man, I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe just like have someone testify to the contents of the pictures. Don't like actually show them to the whole court. To be fair though, apparently the courtroom walls were lined with pictures of Bill's boiled hands, his skinned torso, and his frozen head. So we're kind of in full circus mode at the courthouse here. I mean, point made, I guess. So she would be found guilty of second-degree murder and would receive a life sentence. She was also found guilty of the attack on Robert Hansen as well, which, small side note, isn't it weird that his name is Robert Hansen and we literally just covered a serial killer, Robert Hansen with an E. This one has an O. What are the odds? The poor guy though, she was up for parole for the first time in 2006 and she was denied. Apparently she remarried while in prison and she had conjugal visits. Her new husband was a bit on the older side with some money that he left to her before he died. Can't say she doesn't have a type and can't say she can't work it even in prison. Shoot, I can't even get a decent guy on the outside. I mean, maybe these aren't decent guys. I don't know. But anyway, she was up again for parole and denied in 2011, and she will be up again in 2026. Do you think she's had enough time, or does she deserve to be released at this point, or at any point? Bill Nelson's daughter Martha would look Omaima dead in the eyes in court and state, "I don't know the adequate punishment for a murderer who doesn't even leave the family a body to mourn over. But I do know you don't let her out." All right, guys, that's going to do it. But as always, let's try to end today on a more positive note. And we're going to bring back Detective Scoot Dog for another hard truth. I don't know if they should be harsh truths or gentle truths. I like my truths sugar-coated from time to time, and I know life doesn't always work that way. Maybe real facts with Scoot Dog? I don't know. I don't want to be too harsh is all, but let's see. Come on, Scooty. Here's my boy. Here he is. I gotcha. All right, let's see. So today's real truth is if someone's abusive, you get help. You don't carve them up and eat their ribs like we're going to Chili's. Get help and get out. I don't know. I think one of the only acceptable times maybe to murder someone is in self-defense. What do you guys think? And even then we have people faking the self-defense, like what probably took place in today's case. But you don't kill someone unless you have to. Boy, do I feel like I gotta be careful with what I say right now. So with that, for today's positive highlight, I want to say thank you again to all of the nonprofits and local soup kitchens that busted their butts to serve people in need this Thanksgiving. To everyone who serves and donates, thank you for doing your part to make the world a better place. I know my local soup kitchen had a 2-hour-long community Thanksgiving dinner, and they were able to pass out almost 200 plates, so bravo. And if you're feeling inspired, I want to encourage you to get involved and find somewhere that in your area maybe that gives back, and ask them how you can help. I can tell you from personal experience, you usually get back way more than you give, and I'm not being glib. It's funny how that stuff actually works. All right, well, we touched briefly on Silence of the Lambs today. Silence of the Lambs-esque-ness, I don't know. Lord. But we're going full Silence of the Lambs next week, and we're going to talk about Ed Gein. I'm hoping to have some Death Hawk moth necklaces in my jewelry collection on my Etsy. We'll see if they come out okay, but those passion projects, you know. Anyhow, if you want to have a listen to another case involving another female cannibal, click this link here. And until next week, please stay safe out there. Bye.